Welcome to the podcast. I am Joel.
And I'm Rick. Glad to have you with us.
Yeah, so today, Dad, I was thinking, the other day I was thinking about something you said to me, and it's regarding karma. Now, you didn't actually call it karma. We're going to call this episode Karma, because I think it's the same. Well, first of all, I just like the idea of karma, right? You're going to get it, right?
Oh, yeah.
But I remember one time I was really frustrated with the idea that this guy seemed to be getting away. He had done something really wrong, and he seemed to be getting away with it. He even seemed to be kind of thriving. It was kind of like that David, like, why do the wicked prosper? And this, And I saw, and I was like, oh, Dad, why does God let people get away with that kind of stuff? And I remember you said, well, he may not be getting away with it. It all kind of, essentially you said, he's probably paying for it in ways we don't even know. So that's what kind of struck me, and I realized, and the older I get, the more I realize you're going to pay for it one way or another.
You do reap what you sow, and a lot of times what happens is you are sowing bad seed in one area, and like with a farmer, if he sows seed here, he knows where that thing's going to pop up. It's going to pop up right where he put the seed in. But what I've seen in life is many times when you're sowing bad seed or good seed, the harvest that comes back, but it's in different places.
Right.
For example, you're out stabbing everybody else in the back, but you're going to find your own family for some reason goes south. I mean, that's what happened to David, right? The Lord says to David, because of what he did with Bathsheba, he said, I've forgiven you, but the sword shall never leave your household. And in the next few chapters, and his own son rebels against him, Absalom.
In a very violent way.
Yeah, and he has to flee, and it's a horrible, and his son it's a horrible time. So he reaped what he had sown, but not through, in fact, the thing with Bathsheba, you could have said, oh, well, that was wonderful, turned out good, produced Solomon, the next king, everything's hunky-dory, no problem. But he reaped it in another area in his family that was horrible, horrible.
So I think the thing that stands out to me is, as Christians, we're like, well, it'll all come clear when we get to heaven. But really, there's a lot of unraveling and kind of the reaping and sowing that happens here on earth, even among those who are doing things that are wrong. So before we go too deep down into a hole of you're gonna get it, right? Because I think a lot of us have a fear hanging all over us, like, oh man, it's gonna come back. Rest assured, your sins will find you out. I think that there's also the positive side of it, and I talk to people all the time in my coaching program who things are going really well and they're feeling guilty about it, and I'm like, dude, reaping and sowing goes two ways.
Yeah.
If you've been planting good seeds and you're getting a good harvest, enjoy it.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with enjoying the good harvest. So,
well, it's funny because I always think of the positive side of it first.
Oh, I don't.
I always think of, you sow the good seed and blessings are going to come. You sow kindness, kindness comes back to you. Now, it may not be from the people you sow kindness to. They may treat you like jerks, but you'll find it coming back to you somewhere. So I always think of the positive side of that. And the incredible thing about reaping and sowing is it's not a one-to-one relationship. When you sow one seed, you get a whole bunch. I mean, like if you sow a kernel of corn, how much comes back? Hundreds of, who can count how many would be on a corn stalk? And it's the same way. You may be kind to someone over here. The only weird thing is, like I say, if you're talking agriculture, you know where it's going to pop up. But in sowing kindness and sowing love and sowing patience with other people, it pops up to you in ways you never even expected, and it comes back to you in areas you never even expected. And many times you don't even recognize that that's what produced that harvest,
right? Because
you planted it over there. And the other thing is, with a seed of it's with a seed of corn. Galatians, whatever man sows, he'll reap. The seed of corn has to first die. Now, that Jesus said that a grain of wheat abides alone unless it first die. And so there's that principle of dying. So if you're expecting this to happen like tomorrow, there's a guy there's a homeless guy on the street. I'm going to give him $1, and by tomorrow I'll have like $1,000. No, the seed has to die first of all, and it may not come back to you until 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. It may not come back to you. But when it does come back, it will be multiplied over and over again. But the bad is that way too.
Right, which kind of brings it back to the issue that a lot of people have with maybe the prosperity gospel. It's like Jesus is a slot machine, which what's tricky about it is when Jesus himself promised if you give sparingly, it'll you'll get back sparingly, but if you give generously, it'll go back.
Same measure you give, it shall be given back to you. But he also said, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. So even more.
Right. So there's the reality of that. And the challenge is so as a preacher, you're like, you want to teach people that the blessing comes from it, but then you all of a sudden you get pegged and people are like, oh, you're preaching that prosperity gospel. If you pull the lever, you're going to hit gold eventually.
Yeah. Well, of course, in the honesty, so you want to preach poverty gospel? You go preach the poverty gospel, Because here's the thing, it's a principle of life, sowing and reaping. Now, there can always come a flood and wash out the field. There can always come something that destroys our... So there are exceptions to the rule. You can't just say, well, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to do this, and then that'll come back to me. But the principle is that can always be sideswiped by occurrences in life. But the principle is, if you plant goodness, goodness comes back to you. Yeah. If you plant evil, evil comes back to you. And so it's a choice that we make on a daily basis. And it is a principle. And so, people can, if you want to call it prosperity gospel, well, I don't think Jesus taught a gospel of poverty and, lack. He taught a gospel of obedience to God. And I came to give you life and life more abundant. Now, that doesn't mean a bigger car and a bigger boat, but it does mean a life.
Right.
That's more abundant. And so if I'm sowing peace into other people's lives, I'm going to get peace. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. What you sow, you reap. It comes back to you.
So I was talking to a guy the other day, and he told me his wife had just left him. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, why'd she leave? And he said, because of everything you just preached about this morning. I have been completely absent, and I haven't been there for her. I've been focused on my career. He's like, I said, I work hard and I feel like I deserve things. And he's like, but now I realize I've planted some bad seeds. And he's like, I just want things back to normal. And I wanted to give him something encouraging, but I was like, the problem is you're going to need to slow your time frame, bro, because if you've been planting bad seeds for 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
So here might be my question. Is there any way around the law of the farm, as it's called, the rowing? So, I mean, because grace comes in and gives us what we don't deserve.
Yeah.
And I don't know. The negative side of me is like, well, you can kind of get around it ultimately, but you're still going to pay the price in the meantime. Like that dude is separated from his wife, and there's no way around that. I mean, and he probably had it coming.
Yeah.
He was probably very unresponsive to her. And
Well, I mean, he showed her that's what he wanted by being absent. So I don't really want you around me, and I don't want to be around you. So she just gave him what he wanted.
So he planted bad seeds. He's paying the price now, and he's wondering, is there any way around this? And I'm like, man, in my life.
Yeah. And maybe there is, because it's like, they say that so many of us, we sow our wild oats and then we pray for our crop failure.
Yeah.
And the way around that would be if he were to begin sowing good seed, there's a possibility that his wife could come back with forgiveness.
Right.
And we get back together again, we start again. But the problem is sincerity. Is he wanting to deal with the issue, or is he wanting to fix his wrongness? Is he I just want my wife back.
Right.
Well, if you just want that, then bro, it probably isn't going to happen.
Well, and he said, the funny thing was, I want things back to normal. I'm like, well, normal is what got you here. You're normal. Yeah. You need to change your normal.
Exactly. So if that's the thing, if he's just wanting, I just want my wife back, it's like that thing of, I'm committed to marriage. Well, you really shouldn't be committed to marriage. Mm-hmm. You should be committed to that person. And if you're committed to the person, then the marriage will work out. But if you're committed to marriage, by golly, I don't care what happens. I'm going to stick through this thing thick and thin. Be committed to the person. So if he's just wanting the marriage back,
so
probably not going to work.
Then according to that, he needs to sow seeds into her, not into the marriage. And so the difference, that's an interesting, I've never thought of it that way, but they would be sowing seeds into the marriage isn't going to get you anything.
No.
You've got to sow seeds into your spouse, and then the marriage will be strong, which goes back to what I've always believed. There's no marriage problems. There are just people with problems that bring them to marriage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because what is marriage? I mean, it's just a piece of paper. It's a whatever. It's the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And when you focus on that relationship. And so, if he were to begin to sow into her life, and she's going to have to be convinced that he's really changed and not just wanting, I just want the marriage back. Well, she doesn't want to go back into that. Yeah.
Well, it sounded like she had every right to leave him. I mean, I was trying to be sympathetic with him, but I'm like, sounds like you had that coming, which is a horrible. So Emily always jumps on me when I say this. I say this, most people pretty much get what they deserve. And she's like, that's a horrible way to look at things. You would say it a little differently.
Well, it's your negative way of saying what you sow, you reap.
Yeah, I guess
exactly.
so, yeah.
I mean, it's biblical, but it's like that's the negative side of it. It's like you would take the golden rule and say, do one to others before they do one to you.
No, that's right. Ay. Who is this child you raised? So that's what. But it is true that so many times, which comes down to basically the life you're living now is the life you planted 10 to 15 years ago, and that's what's that famous proverb that says the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. And so many times you look at your life around you and you go, well, I mean, I even realize I'm blessed to be living in the positive side of things right now, where it's. But about 10 years ago, I was really frustrated with life because I expected some seeds to grow up that I hadn't actually planted. Yeah. Now I thought I had planted them, but I'll never forget. Somebody came to me and said, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're just getting started." I'm like, "No, I'm not just getting started. I've been doing this for like 3 years." And they're like, "You're just getting started."
Yeah.
And here it is, 10 years later. And I'm finally starting to see kind of the harvest of like in our ministry and things things I wanted 10 years ago are just now happening. But man, it took just consistently plant. And then I lived in a season for a while. It felt like I was planting seeds that I was never going to see the results of. So that's a question. A lot of times if we're moving too much, we plant seeds we never get to see
you mean moving location from here you were working
like say God's moved you around here.
Working in Peru. And,
Yeah, so where's that, I guess, would come back to the idea that we may not see the reaping in the same place where we planted
that harvest follows you.
Yeah. Which that's interesting because there was a guy I was talking to the other day and he's like, well, if you stick around long enough, you'll get to sit under the shade of the trees you planted. And I'm like, man, I haven't had that luxury up to this point.
Right.
Are there some people that are called to just plant Johnny Appleseed style?
Yeah, well, I think that is where it's a little different than agriculture, because in agriculture, if you plant it here, it's going to pop up there.
Right.
The harvest that we're talking about is a spiritual harvest, so it's a harvest of really things you're planting in your soul. And so your soul is going to go with you wherever. And so it's going to pop up wherever. And so you may have invested in this person and never be around them to see them really come to some great maturity. But the harvest is going to come back to you somewhere else.
Yeah.
In that, some sort of a joy or a peace or investment. Somebody may invest in you. I mean, you never know how it's going to come, and you never know what might have happened.
Oof. Yeah.
So you see the positive thing, and it may not be a 10, it may only be an 8, but if you hadn't sown that seed, you might have had a 3.
Yeah.
Or
that's
negative,
true. Which kind of comes to the idea of raising kids is essentially sowing seeds. Because
definitely. Yeah.
I just seen so many tragic stories recently of people whose lives right now they can't enjoy the latter years of their life because they're having to clean up for kids that they which, man, you hate to be so causal about it, but I mean, there is a connection between how you parent and how your kids grow up. I mean,
well, and on the other hand, you said they have to clean up. Maybe not. Maybe part of the problem is they've been cleaning up after their kids all their lives.
Wow.
And the kids haven't suffered the consequence of it. You think of that father, the prodigal son, he probably knew where that son was.
Right.
Because he kind of knew what had happened. He didn't ask him, so where have you been? What's been going on? And he was a wealthy man, and it's a small country. And so he probably knew what was going on with his son, but he never rushed over to rescue him.
Well, that's a good point, too, because then what you're doing is if you're saving the child from the result of their behavior, you're actually short-circuiting the law of the farm in their life.
Yeah.
We'll bail you out this time. Oh, we'll bail you out again. Well, this is probably my fault anyway, so I'll bail you out again. That gets tricky, though, because you planted some bad seeds. Your child is... I mean, it ultimately comes, I guess, to your own responsibility.
A lot of times the planting the bad seed was the fact that you bailed them out and you didn't let them suffer the consequences of their behavior earlier. Huh. So at some point in time, you got to let them start suffering. Look, you're 40 years old. At some point in time, the kid's got to figure it out on his own. And God keeps using bigger and bigger hammers, you might say. So as a little child, it might be mom paddling your bottom, or it might be making you sit in a room or something, sit in the corner or whatever, And then if mom hasn't disciplined you, then the school tries. And unfortunately today, the parents don't support the schools oftentimes, so therefore the school fails at it. Well, then you start getting into the police start doing it. And if mom's bailing you out of that or dad's bailing you out of that, at some point in time, it gets heavy enough that mom and dad can't bail you out.
Right.
And that's when he begins to come to himself. He's sitting in the pig pen and he goes, what the heck am I doing here? This is ridiculous.
So we kind of got off track, but let's talk about grace, because grace is getting what we don't deserve.
Yeah.
So Jesus comes in and pays the ultimate penalty for our sins. But then there's the element of we're still left with the mess we created to clean up. But I have seen, or for example, I have this friend, and he was very irresponsible with money. And then he's following the Lord, and somebody offered to pay off all of his debt in one swoop. And he's like, instant debt cancellation. It's the Lord. And I'm like, I don't know about that.
It might have been, it might not have been. The guy may have paid it off, may have been his unto the Lord or not. I believe a lot of. I do definitely believe. I mean, I believe in grace,
right?
And I do believe that oftentimes when you do sow a harvest, God will at sometimes kind of tear that harvest up, and an evil harvest,
right.
That it won't come to fruition, and that is grace. But then here's the deal: is to whom much has been given, much is required. And so if God, for example, if that guy, if he came in and he gets all of his debts paid off and then he goes out and just flippantly spends it again, and just wastes it.
Which I've seen, yeah.
Yeah. Then, and somebody may come and do it again. Somebody may come and do it again. The point is that person who's paying it off, if they're being obedient,
right,
they're showing a good harvest. They're going to reap a harvest. This guy will one day stand before God and give an account for the irresponsibility, and it may just be a law. It may not be some punishment. It's not going to. God's going to hold him up, dangle it over a fire. But I believe a lot. Talks about even in heaven, he wipes away every tear.
Right.
Why are we tearful in heaven? I think some of it is we're going to look and see, oh my gosh, what I could have been, what should have been, what God wanted for me.
Regret. Yeah.
And I fiddled it away. God paid me off. God paid this debt off. God set me free from this. And I went out and got in debt again, And what have I got to show for it? Nothing for the kingdom, nothing of eternal value. And it talks about that with the wood, hay, and stubble. When the eyes of the Lord in judgment look upon our lives, and the wood, the hay, and the stubble's burned up, and all that's left is the gold and jewelry. And, you see it. And it says, those who survive that will escape, but as one who escapes through a fire. And so I believe there'll be great loss. For example, in that particular guy, if he goes and he's irresponsible again.
Right.
There'll be tremendous loss, tremendous remorse over what I fiddled my life away with.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about this. You talk about David and how God said, hey, this is going to be passed down to the generations. So let's talk about this. So the Christianese word would be a generational curse. Psychology, we'd call it like a repetition compulsion. Just how easy it is to repeat the mistakes of your parents because nothing was dealt with, and if you don't recognize it. So there's an element of sowing and reaping in that. Like sometimes we pay, for example, you were very strict with alcohol for yourself because your father, your real father, your biological father, was a raging alcoholic. And so you knew, and I mean, this is pretty much proven scientifically that there's this, I don't know, they don't, is it genetic? Who knows? But your very big propensity,
greater propensity for alcoholism,
to be an alcoholic if your parent was. Donald Trump, I heard him say that. Somebody's like, "Why don't you drink alcohol?" I mean, the guy's a party animal, right? But why don't you drink? He said, "Because my brother had it and my dad," and so like he just saw the danger of it. So he stayed away from it. And I noticed you did that. And so in our family, we've got this potential for alcoholism, right? There's all sorts of factors involved. But if God says, I'm passing down what you reaped, your kids are going to, or what you've sowed, your kids are going to reap, can you short circuit that with God's promises as well?
Yeah, I think
does God, once God's put something in motion, can you counteract it with God's promises as well?
I'm trying to think of a biblical example of that.
Yeah, that's a heavy one. I didn't give you a warning on, but yeah.
But yeah, I believe you can in that. again, grace comes into play. And I think that's one of the things when it says you're a new creature. You say, gee, I feel like a whole lot of the old creature. The other side of it, let me go back a little bit. I don't necessarily believe that there's a greater propensity for alcoholism, but I actually believe every sin is that way. We just have studied alcoholism more,
right?
So we kind of know a little more about it. But you have a propensity toward all the sins of the fathers being passed on to you. But again, at salvation, you become a new creature.
Yeah.
And so though your DNA doesn't change, you're still going to look a whole lot like the same person. You're still going to maybe think and act a whole lot like the whole same person. You're still going to have those same drives in your life. But again, as you grow in the Spirit, that's where it talks about in Romans 12, you're being renewed in your mind. You're being transformed, not being conformed to the world, but being transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Yeah.
And so as we grow in the Lord, those things begin to fall away and become less and less. It's the old story of the two dogs. The Indian chief has two dogs fighting within him, and one of them wants to do good and one of them wants to do bad. And somebody said, well, which one wins? He said, the one I feed the most.
Right.
And so if you starve that old nature, well, here we go back. It's funny because in Galatians 6:8, right after it says, Galatians 6:7 says, whatsoever man sows, he reaps. The next one says, he who sows to the flesh reaps corruption.
Right.
But he who sows to the Spirit reaps life. And so it's what we're sowing again. So we again see that sowing into your soul, what are you sowing in your soul?
That's true. So you can short circuit what should be the divine cosmic karma, dare I say it? Yeah. You can short circuit it by sowing to the spirit of the new identity within you.
Yeah.
That's a big concept.
Well, it's like in your yard. They say one of the best ways to get rid of weeds is just to have good, strong grass.
Yeah.
Because if you have good grass, it will drown out the weeds.
Which is why you keep the grass mowed.
Yeah, keep the grass mowed, keep it, and that will kill out the weeds. And so in the same way, just sow the good things in your life, and it will just naturally, by nature, supernatural, but by nature, you will then drown out the weeds and the things that would grow up otherwise.
That's good.
By having good ground.
So, we've all seen bad examples of sowing and reaping.
Uh-huh.
What do you feel in your life? Obviously, you're sitting across from one of them. One of the things that have been the greatest things that you've reaped because of seeds you've sown that you can clearly say, man, I just this is all God's grace, but man, I really sowed in this area. That's a tricky thing too. It's God's it's God that makes it grow, right? But you got to plant the seeds. That's the work as if it depends on you.
Exactly.
Pray as if it depends on God. So if you don't plant the seed, God's not going to bring up something you didn't plant. Yeah. So what have you seen with you and Mom in y'all's life where that?
I'll tell you, really just about everything that's going on in my life right now. My kids, not only all serving God with passion, serving the Lord in their churches and involved, but then raising up godly grandkids. The ministry that I have, Commissioned Every Nation, Commission Ministers Network, all of those things. I mean, the people that God has brought. Nothing. You don't build it on your own, but the people that God has brought to serve in this ministry, everything from our finance, publications, directorship, everything, just amazing people.
So let me jump back real quick, and I didn't warn you about this, so it may catch you off about this question, but what specifically did you plant that's reaping the harvest in us?
I think I put a priority on the family.
You did.
I was and the other thing is I was a pastor, and I wanted to make sure that you guys didn't feel any pressure to go into ministry, quote unquote. I wanted to make sure you felt no pressure as a pastor's kid. I didn't want you to have to. Because here's my deal. I always felt like, people say, well, you're a pastor's kid. You're a Christian, right? As a pastor, I didn't feel like I had to live it. Well, I mean, biblically you do. But before I was in ministry, I felt like he's a pastor, he ought to behave that way. Well, if he ought to behave that way, I as a Christian ought to behave that way.
We're all under the same standard,
it's
man.
What the heck? Now, it does say, there's a higher standard for those who are lead. They'll be held to a higher account. So I understand that. But at the same time, I'm thinking, okay, if I'm a nobody schmuck in the back pew of the church, I want to stand before God and hear the same thing the pastor does.
Right.
So why wouldn't I want to live it the same way he does?
So you planted an investment in, well, I'll tell you what you planted, is you planted time. I never felt like you weren't available for us. You would drop, I even see you do that with Elise now. you'll drop anything to make sure that you're never too busy for us. You were never too busy for us.
Yeah.
And you'd be gone from time to time, but man, when you came back, you were with us. You were present. So I think presence is one thing. Would be an investment.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. What else would you say? I've got one in mind, but I'm curious if you think it's the same thing.
I feel like it's a trick question.
Well, here's my take. I think your sacrifice to put us in Christian education, because that was a sacrifice. It was not cheap.
Right.
It was a lot more work. But your sacrifice to put us in Christian education for probably a majority. At one point you were mom was homeschooling us.
Yeah.
That was a seed that was sown. That I think about that all the time. Where I had to memorize Bible verses growing up, and I'll be up standing up in front of a group preaching, and a verse will come out of me that was the right verse for that what I need to say, and I'm like, where did that come from? Oh yeah, I memorized that in 11th grade, and
I saw the value of that early in my ministry. I saw the value of Christian education. And, I still think it's like the most powerful tool that Christians have. Everybody else knows it. Everybody else knows, you educate the kids and you within 18 years, you got a whole generation.
Yep.
But as evangelical Christians, we're a little slow to catch on to that, So that was, we invest in that. And many times we didn't have the funds for it, and somehow the Lord provided. And so by having a commitment to it, God provided the ability to do that one way or another. So I think it's really a mental thing. It's like, what is the most important? And to me, one of the most important things to me was that my kids be not Christians, because to me a Christian's like, okay, I go to church, I don't smoke, chew, go with girls that do that kind of thing,
Right.
But to me, it's passionate disciples of the Lord Jesus Christ that I pass on to them, because I would feel like if I stood before the Lord and maybe I'd built the biggest ministry in the world, and my name was known across the globe or whatever, and my kids weren't standing there with me, wow, that's a failure.
Which you see that a lot.
Yeah.
And that ministry eventually is going to die out.
Yeah.
But your kids, they're going to hang, ideally, they're going to hang with you till the end.
Yeah. Well, see, I think and I didn't just do that because I thought that was a good thing to do. I see that as biblical.
Right.
I see that Jesus wasn't really busy rushing around, and I've got to build this name for me. He just kind of wandered around, and here's a guy who's sick, and let's see, do I heal this guy? Do I heal this guy? What do I do? He when he died and went up to heaven, when he ascended, there was still a lot of sick people. There were still a lot of needs and stuff. He wasn't all about that. He was about the people that he's with. When he was present, he was present. And so I just felt like it was a biblical principle, and it seemed to me like a family was also a biblical priority with the Lord. So it was really just a matter of aligning myself with what I thought were the Lord's priorities, and focusing on family and focusing on, and then realizing that Peter says, if you don't have your relationship with your wife right, it hinders your prayers. So again, it's like, wow, if I'm really going to stay in touch with God, He cares about my family and having my relationship there right. So,
well, that's a good positive. No, it's funny because you already think that way. I don't think the positive, like, if I just keep planting good seeds. I'm always thinking, what bad seeds am I unknowingly planting that are going to come up and sneak up and strength?
Well, keep your grass strong, and it'll kill those out.
Seymour, in that what's that Little Shop of Horrors? It's like Seymour's going to eat me as I'm feeding.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that's a good thing to end on, is just remembering that, even in those times where it feels like nothing's happening, if you're putting your heart into it, investing in your kids, your finances, even when it means you're like I'm sick of scrimping and saving and paying off this debt or whatever, you are planting seeds.
Planting for a long run.
Long game.
Let me say one thing about that, too, because you said, well, it's 10 years, and it was like that. And so somebody could be saying, well, 10 years, me and all depressed. Hey, you're going to be doing something in those 10 years.
That's right.
So you can say, well, I'm not going to plant a good seed for 10 years, because, 10 years from now, you'll be glad you did. So start now.
Best time to plant a tree.
Yeah. And don't get all bugged out like, well, I'm not going to see it for 10 years. I'm not even going to try it. Well, you're going to be doing something. Well,
and then who's to say, too, Charles Duhigg talks about that. When you change some patterns in your life, you might start to see immediate results in all sorts of other areas.
You do, yeah.
Yeah, so, you may say, man, I'm 10 years away from, getting ourselves out of this hole of debt I built. Or I dug. I guess you don't build a hole, but the hole I dug. But the reality is, just the discipline of doing that might actually clean up some other areas of your life.
Yeah, that atomic habits idea too. You change this little atomic. It's a little small. It's
at an atom size level. Yeah.
But all of a sudden things begin to react, and one thing works off of another, and And there's the grace of God, too. When he
Yeah.
sees that you're really running in the right direction, oftentimes you get a tailwind.
That's
gonna
true.
push you along.
He'll blow in your direction, and all of a sudden you're like 10 years. He can 10 years down into the future, what you couldn't do in 10 years. He'll put you
So
there.
the key is get your sails set in the right direction, get the boat pointed in the right direction, and wait for the Holy Spirit to blow you along.
If you liked what you heard, please consider sharing this with a friend. For more information, visit joelmalm.com or rickmalm.com. Thanks for listening.